Hello friends, today with the lecture on GK Chesterton done by Professor Payal Nagpal, who teaches English in Janki Devi Memorial College, and she has been working on the English essay also, specifically in the last two years or so, and she traced the history of the English essay, its origins in the 18th century, vitally and crucially, and then the whole of the 18th century and 19th century were covered by the team that is working on this particular series. And then finally we shift to the 20th century also. And the question that I would like to raise to Professor Nagpal also is that it's very difficult for any mode of writing to survive in the 20th century, because 20th century is given entirely, more or less entirely, to modernism. And we were wondering whether English essay would be there in the form in which it evolved in the 19th century. And we realized that there are writers in the 20th century who are as vivacious, as humorous, as funny, as Professor Nagpal will tell you regarding Chesterton, as before. And therefore, it's very difficult for any form to die down like that under the weight of strong trend like modernism. So that happened, and we have Chesterton, we have Bernard Shaw, we have A.G. Gardiner, we have Robert Lynn, all of them lined up in the 20th century, and who keep the atmosphere light and fun related. So with this short comment, I request Professor Payal Nagpal to take it over and tell us about Chesterton in specific terms and the overall trend in the 20th century in general terms. So over to you.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. As you very rightly pointed out that the English essay, it would be difficult for any other form except for the modernist writing to survive in the 20th century. But the English essay is pretty much there in the 20th century. There are, of course, some points that one needs to consider, some questions that one needs to pose about the English essay in the 20th century. I think the essay is first and foremost of great value because it's giving us a direct form of address and a kind of writing which is very different from modernist writing. So the kind of craft that the modernist novel or modernist poetry particularly thrived on and is based on, that kind of craft is certainly not there. There's a kind of, it's a very direct form of writing that we see in the English essay, and it continues pretty much in the form that we see it in the 18th and it continues in the 19th century. So we see it in the similar form in the 20th century. But having said that, the kind of social critique, the kind of in-depth analysis at times that we see in the 18th century when it originates and right through the 19th century, that is kind of, it's very different in the 20th century. So of course the craft is there. There is the very when we look at Chesterton's writing, so he's very, very witty. So there is a certain wit that goes along with the essay, and he keeps that trend going. And at the same time, however, that kind of intensity of the association of this kind of subcategory with the social context appears in a very different manner in the 20th century. So to move on to the writer for today, G.K. Chesterton, whose essays we would be discussing from his book All Things Considered. He was born in 1874 and lived up to 1936. So we see him, his writing kind of partake both of the late 19th century and certainly the early 20th century. But Chesterton evolves his style of writing, especially in the form of the essay, pretty much in the way that the essay was written both in the 18th and the 19th century, and the kind of narrative complexity that a modernist writing thrives on is something that the English essay it manages to maintain its own despite the way in which writers were engaged in writing or in the craft. He was a Londoner, so born in Kensington, and he has a very vast body of journalistic work. and he wrote for the Illustrated London News, Daily News. He had his own paper called GK's Weekly. And what's also very interesting, and maybe viewers might not be aware, that he was part of a kind of detective club. It was called the Detection Club, and he's known for creating the fictional priest detective Father Brown. So there are a lot of series available, on it's called the Father Brown detective series. So this fictional priest detective was actually created by Chesterton, and it's interesting because, of course, decades later, more recently, a parallel to the Father Brown figure is the Sister Boniface figure, who's the female counterpart, but who uses forensics, where Father Brown uses more of a kind of intuition, and uses more of the psychological to solve a case. Sister Boniface relies more on early forensics and knowledge of science. So Chesterton wrote almost about 4,000 pieces, one can call them essays, that were included in newspaper columns. So he was, of course, associated with a lot of writers. He was friends with Shaw and this Wilde, but he was closely associated with the poet Hilaire Belloc, and in fact they were almost referred to as Chester Belloc. And at the same time, Chesterton wrote criticism. So he wrote on Dickens, he wrote on Shaw, William Blake, and other writers. He wrote on theology. So it's a very, very vast body of writing that one is really looking at. So All Things Considered, appears in book form in 1915. So this is, the point that Professor Prakash raised right at the beginning about modernism. So this is the period of high modernism, that in 1915, we have writers like T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf who are writing, and here we have G.K. Chesterton, who continues to make use of the form of the English essay. He begins this by, with a note which is called The Case for the Ephemeral, and says, so his typically witty style is quite evident right at the beginning. He says, he writes in this particular piece, "I cannot understand the people who take literature seriously, but I can love them, and I do." So, and one looks at the writing, it just totally carries on the tradition of the English essay. And so he says that out of my love, I want them to keep clear of this book. And he calls his essays, he says it is a collection of crude and shapeless papers upon current, or rather flying subjects, and they must be published pretty much as they stand. They were written as a rule at the last moment. So here, this idea of the essay, I mean, we of course go back to the definition of loose sally of the mind, but here, how it is crude and shapeless. So it's the writer's thoughts, and almost as if these were, not essays but notes on a wide variety of topics, and he covers a whole variety of topics in this particular book also. And he says upon current, or rather flying subjects. So it could be the imagination that he would be talking about, but the current is a very important word here, because we are looking at topics that pertain to the people at that point of time. So the temporal and the topicality both are very, very important coordinates, I think, in his writing. So when he says that these are crude, shapeless papers upon current, or rather flying subjects, so he's automatically introduced his writing as an essay, and the range is very vast. It could be political, it could be social, it could be imaginative. Everything is in a sense a part of this particular book, and all these essays again keep up the tradition, as mentioned, of the 18th century essay, because and it's not as if there's going to be a sense of continuity, but it is in the crude and the shapeless that there is a sense of honesty and a direct point of view that is expressed, which is very, very unlike the writing of that particular time. So I would request Professor Prakash to comment on, the way in which Chesterton actually begins with this particular collection of essays.
Well, Professor Payal Nagpal, you have gone behind the scene, where the emotion is coming in the current form, in the current atmosphere, and he is all the time, as you say, aware of his surroundings, about the questions that are haunting different people, and he is in touch with the people. And I wonder, and this is the question I raised for you to also comment on, whether the English essay and literature in general till the 19th century was some kind of a bridge between the reality around and the writer. And the writer would not think inwards, he would not come back to his psychological self to share the anguish and the pain and the suffering that he is undergoing at that point of time, and that he is talking all the time to the subject of the reader. And the question I raise is whether it has something to do with journalism. If you are a journalist, if you are writing, if you are bringing out a paper, then all the time you are talking to the reader, the potential of the actual reader, and therefore there is no way you can avoid the English essay form, because there the chatting begins. There the connection between the reader and the writer is so very close that it automatically becomes a kind of English essay. What do you say to that?
I would completely agree. There are 2 or 3 points that you're making here. One is about the style of writing itself. One is, of course, the reader is always implicated. There is the essay that's being written. It's journalistic. When it is journalistic writing, it is a direct address to the reader. So certainly the reader, and the reader also of a particular time period, because when the writer is writing the essay, and is writing keeping the reader in mind, he or she certainly has the reader of that particular period in mind. Of course, it resonates with and has implications for the reader today, but when it is written, it has a certain kind of reader in mind. The second is this whole point about the chatty style, something that Chesterton also refers to, and he privileges this kind of style which which allows somebody like Chesterton to share his views on a wide variety of topics. And the third is about the way in which the form of the English essay is really, that bridge, as you rightly put, between, the society and the writer. And one can actually, in terms of genres, we generally look towards the novel, we look towards drama or poetry. But I think it's high time that the English essay is considered, a solid category in its own self, because the way in which it gives insights into the society of the times is like probably no other category at all. So Chesterton too kind of refers to these points, and he talks about his own work, the essays, and says that the chief vice of his essays are that they are very serious, because he says he had no time to make them flippant. And he's of course being very witty here again,
tongue in cheek.
Yes, speaking absolutely tongue in cheek. And he says then he has a qualifier. So he says it is easy to be solemn but very hard to be frivolous. So he's also making a dig at the writers of the time that who take on that very solemn attitude. And so he says that of course it's very easy to be solemn, but it is very hard to be frivolous. And so he's also saying that he had no time to make them flippant. So and he says that when he resumes what he calls the defense of this indefensible book, he says that the articles then arise from a disadvantage, that they are long-winded and they are very elaborate. And so he says in these essays, he's very angry with himself. He says because he did not have a lot of time to be very quick about it, and so he's written these long winding essays. And he says that there are several cases in which he says it took him 2 or 3 pages to describe the attitude of which the essence, he says, could be expressed in an epigram. So this also kind of draws attention to the length, the narrative style of the essay. And he says that, of course, he could have expressed it in an epigram, but he's taken 3 pages to describe it. So, of course, there's a reason for it, and it tells us about the form of the essay. And since we're talking so much about modernity, modernism, so here is a quote directly from the very first. Almost like an introductory essay or a preface, one might say. And to quote from it, Chesterton writes, "It is incomprehensible to me that any thinker can calmly call himself a modernist. He might as well call himself a Thursdayite. But apart altogether from that particular disturbance, I am conscious of a general irritation expressed against the people who boast of their advancement and modernity in the discussion of religion. But he says, I never succeeded in saying the quite clear and obvious thing that is really the matter with modernism." And he says then, finally, and this is, I think, the most important line here, "The real objection to modernism is simply that it is a form of snobbishness." So, this, I think,
That's a very
sets
serious
the,
allegation.
yes, it's a very serious allegation, and he says that to call yourself a modernist, you might as well call yourself a Thursdayite, or I mean, he's really.
What exactly is the implication of you bringing in
So
Thursday? Poor Thursday.
it could be anything, poor Thursday, certainly. So he says this is a form of snobbishness. He's very clear about it. And I think the association with this and the solemn attitude of the writers, I think the 2 points kind of connect.
Thursday comes in the middle of the week. So the burden of the previous days and the burden of the coming days.
To come,
that is what modernism is.
Yes. So he says that this is nothing but pure snobbishness. And so in a sense that when we probably talk about this in terms of the interaction, one may say, of different genres, then I think the English essay is a counter to modernist writing. And one should read the English essay of the 20th century especially for the kind of counter that it provides to a very different style of writing that emerges in the 20th century with modernism. So he's, I mean, a lot of people might disagree with his idea that this is snobbishness, but he says, well, this is how it is. And so he says, he carries the argument further by saying that simply getting books from Germany and flaunting that, there is knowledge that one is getting, he says it's like, you've got some bonnets from Paris. And so he also, calls philanthropy, a kind of religious persecution. So, and he says that the man who happens to have material power in the state, either by wealth or official position, he says he should govern the fellow citizens not according to religion or philosophy, but according to his own ideas. So here, one may, there are a lot of pitfalls that he warns the readers against, but very importantly, this way in which this writing continues to the 20th century is important. Another very important aspect that he's against, and he expresses it in this very introductory chapter, he talks about what he calls anonymous journalism. And he says anonymous journalism is very dangerous, and he almost, refers to it as poisonous, because it is, he says it's moving towards what he calls an anonymous life. And one of the important things to keep in mind about Chesterton's writing is, especially his later writing, is that he is also somebody who converts to Catholicism. So in 1922 he converts to Catholicism, but while he is writing this is pretty much 1915. So it's actually in the phase before his conversion, though he was inclined towards Catholicism even through this phase. It's not as if he wasn't, but the proper conversion takes place only in 1922. So he's also positioned in a sense, within Catholic faith in a sense. So he talks about anonymous journalism is dangerous, and he says the horrible thing about our contemporary atmosphere is, he calls it anonymous journalism, and that society is becoming some kind of a secret society, and the modern tyrant, he says, is evil because of this and is probably more nameless than the slave. And he says, and to end this particular piece, he says the last indictment against this book is the worst of all. It is simply this, that if all goes well, this book will be unintelligible gibberish, for it is mostly concerned with attacking attitudes which are in their nature accidental and incapable of enduring. So he says that he calls it gibberish, but of course it is extremely lucid, and even though he calls it crude and shapeless, there is a concrete form that his writing, really speaking, takes. But he spells out the agenda, which is attacking the attitudes which he as writer, and this is where the essay becomes a bridge, but the essay also becomes a way in which the writer expresses his views on the society of which he or she, which they are a part. So, which, he says attitudes that he finds very, very offensive. So, he says, brief as is the career of this book, he says that the career of this book might just be 20 minutes more than the philosophies that he attacks. So, he is also kind of already, in a sense, undermining his own position to actually strengthen it. To really speaking, strengthen it and to put it forth. So one has to also understand that the wit is such, and he's constantly speaking tongue in cheek, that it's important to understand at each point. So when he says that the book might last just 20 minutes more than the philosophies that he is attacking, the idea is still the focus remains on the philosophies that he is attacking. And so, in a sense, he's strengthening his position. In the end, it will not matter to us whether he says whether we wrote well or ill, whether we fought with flails or reeds. And so he says, and this again is very, very important, pretty much like the statement that he makes on modernism. He says, to quote from this essay, "In the end, it will not matter to us whether we wrote well or ill, whether we fought with flails or reeds. It will matter to us greatly on what side we fought." So, whatever be the position that is taken, it's important to keep in mind that Chesterton is drawing attention to some very, very important ideas here. And here again, I would request
I
Professor
think
Prakash
yes.
to
No.
share his
One
views.
is very sensitive about all this, and he's showing that very clearly. He is in fact talking from a slightly disadvantageous position, because all the centers of knowledge and all the center of that kind of power, they are in the hands of modernists.
Yes.
And therefore his job is to take different points of modernism and to counter them with his own understanding of the current life, the situation, and the individual who is suffering from it. And he does so in the witty form. Witty form means that you have to consider him at 2 or 3 levels: at the level of language, at the level of the obvious idea, and at the level of the wit that is built into the whole thing. So I believe that he is very, very conscious about the social reality of the time, and particularly the cultural scene that is surrounded by. And therefore, one would say that he is to revive now once again in the 21st century, because the England of the time is very clearly reflected with all its prejudices, in his own writing. And it's not about just the 1930s or 40s when he's thinking of publishing his essays, but it carries a lot of the social history that he's confronted with.
Yes, certainly. That is absolutely true. That the essay in this way is a document of the social history of the times, something that begins in the 18th century. And if one just picks up any of these essays by the essayists and reads them, one gets a very, very clear insight into the way in which the society is changing at that particular point of time.
So friends, with this comment by Dr. Payal Nagpal with respect to Chesterton's view of writing in general, and writing of the English essay in particular, is to be considered this way. And I believe that we have already a background against which the writing that he did in his English essay form is to be understood and interpreted. So that will be taken up in the following discussion. And let's wait for that, and thank you, and we will come back to Professor Payal Nagpal again to discuss things further.